Isabel. No, just kidding. How am I doing? So, first question, what year was District 63 Country School started? Anybody? 1905, says Brunel.
Yes, sir. No.
Anybody know? That's not quite that early. Not 1850.
No, 1870.
70s, 80s. No, it was, the year was 1866. 1866. So it was started in 1866. And we're going to take a little trip back in time and not spend a lot of time there, but the school closed in 1970. For 104 years later, as I mentioned, we have this many students that we know of that are still living, and here today we have around 70 or well over half. So my next, in order to go back to 1966, I'm going to go and talk a little bit about what was going on in. Sorry, no, that's okay. You said right up here.
Then we can see.
Yeah, we can't see.
You can't see. Go ahead.
Yeah, just sit down while you do it.
Okay, sit down while you're doing this. All righty, fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, let's take a quick look at it. Not to elaborate this. School opened in 1866. What was going on in Minnesota during that time? Territory was formed in 49. It was state in 1858. In the early 1860s, there was a civil war going on, and quite a few Minnesotans went to fight in that. In the 1860s, it was pretty much the Germans, not so much during the Civil War, but before and after, German immigrant pioneers moved into Stearns County. There was also some Indian wars and things like that, but it really didn't affect us here, right here in Stearns County. That was mostly to the south. And in 1862, there was a Homestead Act signed into law. Are we familiar with the Homestead Act? The Homestead Act, the land was free, right? The land was free, but there was a catch. You had to live on it, and you had to show improvement every 5 years before it was yours. And it sounds kind of free land. It feels like a pretty neat deal, doesn't it? But you know, if you stop and think about it, all this was open prairie out here, and there was no Home Depot, there was no Menards, there was nothing. You just came out there, that's your piece of ground, out there in the prairie, and you got to survive in the wintertime. And I think sometimes it just is helpful to just think about what those early pioneers were, what they went through. Anyway, right after that is when School District 63 was started, 1866. It's well documented down in the Stearns County Museum in St. Cloud. There's a volume just like this, and it talks about District 63, known as the Wolf Settlement, was organized in 1866, and even names its first officers, first teacher, and got 25 pupils attended. And it mentions a bunch of teachers, including right at the end here is Joseph Law, who happens to be the grandfather of Curtis Spanier offspring that are here with us today. The Irma's dad, correct? Right. So he's listed as one of the teachers. Let's zero in on 63. You know, during that time, it was so early, the townships were just surveyed in 55. Zion Township formed in 66. So here's the Zion Township, here's the sections. Here's where we're located. Right, if this is County Road 32, this is a north-south road. Right here on the corners where District 63 lies. And while that was happening, 1865, there was a Casper Wander that homesteaded 160 acres right surrounding this school. This school was originally part of his homestead. At one point we thought it was part of the Michael Leeser homestead. No, this was the earliest part of the Michael Leeser homestead. But so there was a 1 acre tract, and it was awarded in 1866. There's a deed, looking at the abstracts, 1 acre was awarded. to District 63. And in 1867, Mike Leeser initiated this homestead. Bottom line, this school was formed while the surrounding acres land was being homesteaded, meaning they were barely established, and they'd already set up a school. I guess knowing how important it was to an education was. Let's zero in. It turns out on this farm, there was somebody who wrote an account. So this was the home farm place, and her name was Frances Spaniard. She's the grandmother of the Herbert Leeser offspring that are here. And she grew up on that farm. She was born in 1866. Years later, Frances wrote about her experiences and memories of growing up on that farm. It was published in 1937. Here is what she wrote. Very interesting. She talks about the Homestead Act passed my folks. So that would be Michael Leeser and his wife Frances. They talked about going out to Big Prairie to take Homestead, what is now northwestern township of Zion. It was settled between Lake Henry, St. Martin, and so forth and so forth. It has been called the Wolf Settlement. I found this interesting. The Wolf Settlement, they were originated in Cold Spring, and folks there tried to persuade them not to move out here because the wolves would devour them. Isn't that interesting? Now, and despite the warnings, people settled it anyway. As far as I know, I don't think the wolves ate anybody when they're out here. So I guess, who would have figured that early on in the history of Stearns County, there was fake news? So we have fake news. Let's jump to this paragraph. This is very interesting, and this gives us a little bit of glimpse. She talks about the settlers cooperating and building houses and barns, and sometimes they lived in one house while they were building another. The greater part of buildings were made of logs. Even the little red schoolhouse where the writer spent most of her school days. So this Frances, who grew up on that farm, attended the school here, and it was a log, little red cabin schoolhouse. That was the early history of this farm. Taking a look at that, this, generally speaking, this is not the picture of the schoolhouse, but from another historian, I was able to get this picture from her. Probably this is very close to what it looked like. This is an actual picture. We don't know where, we don't know when, but this is probably what the school looked like. So just a few more points that Frances made in her account that I really found interesting. While school was in session, those early years, there was a scarcity of wood. She talks about that. You know that when they homesteaded and built those log cabins, where'd you get the wood if this is an open prairie? Anybody ever think about that? Either the Sauk River, 3 miles to the north, or Lake Henry. And they had to haul that one log at a time, I'm sure, in order to put together their structures for a house and a barn. Something to survive that early first winter, of course. They had the severe blizzards. She talks about the worst blizzard in the 70s. For 3 days, settlers couldn't get to their barns. Even some individuals perished after getting lost in storms. There was also diphtheria. The Michael and Frances Leeser family lost a son, Jacob, at the age of 4 due to diphtheria. That's how severe it was. She says that nearly every family lost at least a member to the disease. Wow. There was the grasshopper plague. I'm sure you've heard about that. And there's also lack of market for some of the farmers hoping to sell their livestock. It wasn't that easy. So these are just some of the challenges and hardship. And it was all in the middle of that there was school days, that school was opened up. So let's move on. Let's just look at a general history of county schools, country schools in Minnesota. The earliest schools were established in, this should be 1851, no typo there, and it's a state in 1858. So Minnesota is still a territory, state in 58. So there were some schools in there. They came up with this neighborhood plan. What was that? School districts could form within walking distance of surrounding farm places. Here's a picture of Zion Township. There's 4 schools in Zion Township at one point, 4 country schools. Here's the location of Zion, of District 63. That's where we are. Most districts had something like 4 or 5, most townships, I should say. So that in Stearns County, there was, I think, something like 200. We're about to get to that. By 1913, across the state, there were close to 7,000 school districts for state country schools, 200 being in Stearns County. Moving ahead, by 1957, the jurisdiction of these schools is transferred from county to state. And I'm thinking you might remember this. District 63 became 66 in 1957 as a result of that legislation. The state took it over. As soon as the state took it over, there were consolidation laws put into place. The overall trend was consolidation. About 10 years later, we were down to 1,742 districts in the state. And by 1967, there was a law that was made, and basically schools had to shut down. And this school was shut down in May of 1970. So that's a basic history outline of the country schools in Minnesota. Here's a picture of, so sometime after the log cabin, there was a school that was built, a wooden frame schoolhouse. That's this schoolhouse. This was shown in 1902. About 42 students look like they're lining up in here. The priest is, or the teacher is right here, Gillitzer, Joe Gillitzer at that time. You'll see this picture a lot. Maybe some of you have seen it before, some of you even have it, but it's a fairly classic picture. And I guess it might be that way because they probably didn't take many of those kind of photos. Anyway, there's a couple of this clergy over here that are also listed on the back of this photo. And I have a print of that photo over there on the table. Fast forward about 15 years, this is a log, this is the same building, that tree is gone in here. So this is pretty much the building that was lasted until the current building. So this is a frame schoolhouse. Some of you remember going to this school. It looked a little different. I guess the entry here was kind of a lean-to built on. It was a larger entryway. But raise your hand if anybody thinks that they were part of going into that part of that school. Nice and high. All of these go through here. Look around, you can see who we think went to that school. Does anybody have a comment or anything to offer? I should have encouraged anybody if there's questions or anything. Just get my attention. Excuse me. What's going on? I'm going to pull up somebody going to say something. Sorry. If somebody does have something to say or wants to have a question or a comment, please feel free to jump in.
That's not the final school before this one, because that was our school was a stucco building.
Yep, that's stuff.
Brown stucco.
Okay. Now, I've kind of checked with 3 people they think it is now. They could have easily been finished. This is in 1970. I don't know, is that possible, Vince? I mean, that could be true, but I did check. This picture was taken in 1917. 1917 is when the picture was taken. So it might have changed a lot. And I know for a fact, for instance, this side here is facing east. That side is west, this is south. And this is different on this side of the building. Does that make sense? And it might be stucco, and that could be. Anybody else? They built a new school in 53. This school, 53. Okay. Anyway, it might be the, go ahead.
There was a remember, and the whole thing was stucco, and the clothes chute was on one side, and the clothes were, the girls on one side, and the boys was in the sleeve, that they go on this side. And the janitor got $75, no, the teacher got $75 a month, The janitor got $85 more.
Interesting. So the question is, how did it letter E? You know, I think my parents differently. I don't know if it would tear another one down. This looks like it's in pretty good shape. In my opinion.
I don't know, I just remember how it
Well, alrighty. So let's move on. One of the things that the Stearns County History Museum was able to provide data on the class sizes that went to the school. So here's a number of students plotted on this direction: 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. Here's 1910, 20, 30, 40, 50, 16, 70. It was closed down, of course, in 70. The last couple of years we don't have data for it. It was 1960, around 1960, went from 8th grades to 6th grades. You can see the number of students dropping off from in the 30s and 40s down into the 20s. Okay? There were some years, the overall average was about 40 students. You can see it kind of fluctuates with time, but the overall average was 40 students. And as far as we know, we think that just one teacher, there's only one teacher, you know, for 40 students through the history of the school. So there was a new schoolhouse built. Somebody here, I guess Jared just asked, the new schoolhouse. The acres was 1 acre to start with, but then it was changed in the late 40s to be another acre was added. It was officially recorded in 51, but sometime in the late 40s, another acre was added. We think that it was in response to a school board issue to build a brand new school. That was passed in 51, according to the Painesville Press, and by the fall of 53, Alice Schaefer says that she was in the 8th grade, and that was the first class that opened in the new school. I don't know how that jives with others, but at least that's one personal testimony. Okay, Alice, is that your story and you're going to stick to it?
Yeah.
Well, okay.
I know.
That's okay. That's good enough for me. That's before I was there.
Yeah, because I started 15 in Painesville. And I went.
Hold it. This is good.
We moved in the middle of the winter. We had our Christmas play in the new building, and then after our Christmas vacation, we could take all our books and move the classes into the big new white building with 2 doors, 2 restrooms, and the boys and girls cloakroom. Can you imagine?
Somebody else has something to add? This is your microphone as well as mine. I'm willing to share it. Somebody has something to say. Thank you. That was good. Okay. The building still stands as one of the few country school buildings. I know for a fact in the rest of the Zion Township, the other 3 are down. And I think if you go around even driving through the country, people will remember where there was a country school and it no longer stands. So this is one of the few country schools that is still standing. And again, that is in no small effort due to the effort from Paul Orbick and the American Legion. And again, thank you, Paul, for all you've done to help keep the school. And I think you were all here before when Paul pointed out, this would have been the east side of the school right in here, okay? And there'd be windows along the east side, and on the west side, I think that would have been, those booths right over there would have been that side of the school. Because now, it's been added to both east-west, but not north-south. So we're sitting in the very, right here, we're talking about this in the same room that class was held for quite a few years. Just think about that, the very same space. Kind of interesting. Moving on. Just going to give a quick summary of the history. We didn't spend a lot of time, but if you're just thinking about the history of 63, it's significant to know that it's established in 1866. and the area surrounding it was being settled and homesteaded by German immigrant pioneers. First schoolhouse we know was a red log cabin schoolhouse. Mary Jane Heisler was the first, 23 students. German, we did talk about this. German was the language spoken through the largest part of the history of this school. Paul even said in the 50s they were speaking German at home, and the first time we spoke English was at this school. Can you imagine this for nearly 100 years? Now, it was, in the early 1900s, there was English spoken, but there was probably a lot of German spoken too. Until the war broke out, and then there was an anti-German. Yep. And then everything went anti-German. Go ahead, Colette.
Our parents had to learn English when they came to school because they only spoke German at home.
I think that was quite common, right? We have a 1902 photograph of that first school. It's a wooden frame schoolhouse, and I think we talked about that. 42 students, first teacher. The average attendance through the early 1900s was 40 students in 8 grades. 1960 went from 8 to 6, and one teacher. The current building approved in the early 50s, changed to 1966, and was closed in May of 1970 after being opened for 104 years. Now let's look at a little bit the names of some of the teachers that we were familiar with. I think with certainty we can go back to this time, but some of you may have teachers that received this. But this is what I knew in my records of what I have. Elmer Muckness was here for about 8 years. John Wentlet was here for 4 years. Mikulski, 3 years. Donkey was here for a segment, like 3 years. No, 2 years, and then again. And she got, Eldon White came here for 1 year. Violet Donkey from Sauk Center came back and finished it off. I was talking to Arlene Gully the other day. She said both Mikulski and Mr. White stayed reported at their farm, the Gully farm, just east of here, while they were teaching here. That's right.
Elmer must have a house on the school ground.
Sounds about right. And so did Wetland. Did Wetland too? What did you say, Ron?
I was going to say that John Mikulski enjoyed baseball. And there were times that he would send the young first to fourth grade boys and all the girls home at noon, so the boys from grades 5 to 8 could stay and practice baseball for the entire afternoon.
Or they would send people into school, and Diane and Rosemary and I and some of the others.
Okay, we gotta catch this. This is too good. This is too good. This is too good.
There were other times where kids would all, the older boys and stuff, would go out and play baseball, while Diane, Rosemary, Weezer, and who else was there? We would be in and teaching all of the younger kids. While he was out there playing baseball, and my brothers were out there playing baseball.
And that's why all the women in this room, whose IQ is a lot greater than me. Oh boy, those men can play baseball though. Those men can play baseball.
In my part of when I had a school board, you're right. We lined up from youngest to oldest, and we played ball out there at my years. And St. Martin had twice as many kids, and they never could beat this school. Neither could Lake Henry. No, that was true.
Your comment, please.
After we got to high school, then we were
Well, okay, so the moral of that story is some of us didn't come out too smart, but we could sure play baseball. Thanks for that. No, so we have some pictures here. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. I'm just going to kind of whip through these. This is, I think, our earliest photo, I think, class photo, 53, 54. This was contributed by Gene Hamish, and a few others had this photo. Anyway, it's really, all the names are on that, and you can find that over on the table over there. And we're not gonna spend a whole lot of time looking at these on the table. The names are associated with that. These are some of the students. We have some of these pictures that are in here. I have two brothers on there. There's Don Wendland. And you see some of these people that you know. We have a picture, 56, 57. There's John Mikulski. Okay. With the students. We have one from 53, and I think this is just the younger people in school at this point. And there's also names that are associated with this. Again, look over on the table. Those are the names associated with that. Oh, here's our baseball picture. There's John. There's the proud coach, John Mikulski. All righty. And man, this is kind of good right in here, isn't it? So Paul, are these kids giving you nightmares? Anyway, we see Charlie over there in the upper left. We see Vern in the back row. Looks like a father. And then there's Orville next to John Mikulski. And I don't know, is that like Beerman maybe? Roger Mayer. Roger Mayer's down in the second row, second from the left. That's where Roger Mayer is. Leroy Leeser's next to him. And Terry's the catcher, right in the middle. Who would have figured that, huh? I think he was the puniest one. They said, you get to be catcher. We didn't have much choice. Anyway, this was in, when I started in the first grade, 1958. We had the names of students. This was a good one. I think this was one that was given, I think Judy has this picture. Judy Spanier has this picture. And again, there's also names that go with this. This is over on the table. Really kind of cool. That's Violet Dumpy over there. I had her for 4 of my 6 years while I was here, and I would say she was a good teacher, and I did manage to learn something. And no, we didn't play that much baseball under her. And what is this one here? Okay, so this is the most recent one. I don't know exactly what year this is. And I'm just going to go to the end here. So now, we started to talk about this. I think these slides have kind of triggered a few memories in here. And I would just love for people to share some of their experiences. But we are going to start with a guest of honor today, who happens to be the oldest living former student here. And we're going to see what she has to say. She's going to share with us, and we do that. Miss Esther, you can stay seated. You can stay seated. Don't you worry about moving.